students, I am Dr. Nimi Singh. Today I bring you the next learning episode. In this episode, we will discuss about the paint, the chemical composition and the classification. You will also get to know about the class and the individual characteristics of paint. In addition to it, you will also be acquainted with the importance of paint in various cases and how paint evidences are collected, preserved and handled. We will end up this module with a conclusion. Dear students, let's have a look at the modules which we are going to learn today. We will first do the introduction and the definition of paint, then we will come to the chemical composition of paint, then classification of paint and the class and the individual characteristics of paint. What is the importance of paint in various cases? Collection, preservation and handling of paint, scene of crime, and in the end we will conclude this lecture. Let us now come to the introduction part. Paint is actually a highly valuable evidence due to the availability of painted surfaces in wide range and variety of layered colors, luster and types. Paint evidence is usually transferred when one vehicle hits another vehicle, a pedestrian or a building, and can be matched to potentially identify the car in question. In a crime related to property where a tool is used to break into a building, paint transferred to or from the tool can connect the tool to the location. Now, analyzing automotive paint can identify the make, model and sometimes also the year of a vehicle. Now, collection, coming to the collection part, to collect paint, investigators document the scene, then peel off or excise small amounts of paint from the source. Then comes the chemical composition of paint. Now, paint comprises of binders, pigments, solvents and some additives. What are binders? Now, the binder is nothing but any substance or material that draws or holds other substances to form a cohesive whole. It is a polymeric substance. The binder is mixed with other additives such as drying agents, surfactants, etc. and then dissolved in a solvent. Sometimes the binder, the solvents and additives are collectively called the vehicle or the film former. The solvent imparts liquidity to the paint. When the solvent evaporates, the binder polymerizes and forms a film that traps the pigment particles and smoothly covers the surface. It provides a supporting medium for pigments and additives. The binders are responsible for good adhesion of the coating to the substrate. The binder, it holds the pigment particles distributed throughout the coating. The binder is dispersed in a carrier which can be a water or organic solvent either in molecular form, that is true solutions, or as colloidal dispersions, that is emulsions or sols. Then comes the pigments. Pigments are generally colored inorganic substances that are ground into a fine powder and suspended but not dissolved in the binder. Pigment is actually insoluble in the medium in which it is dispersed. That means the pigment granules remain intact and do not dissolve and gets dispersed across the surface evenly. They are composed of tiny solid particles less than even 1 micrometer in diameter, a size that enables to reflect light. Now, visible light has wavelength between 0.4 micrometer to 0.7 micrometer. It imparts color and opacity. Pigments render a characteristic finish to the paints and protect the surface which is underneath from corrosion and withering. Now, so the three main functions of pigments comprise of optical function of providing color, opacity and gloss, protection to the subsequent layers, a reinforcing function which helps the binder in proper adhesion. Thus, for pigment to be effective, it has to be evenly dispersed throughout the solvent. The surrounding pigment particle is a layer of moisture, and in some cases it is gas also. For the pigment to be in contact with the solvent, displacement of the layer of moist air or gas is carried out, and this process is what is called as wetting. Pigments can be broadly classified as organic and inorganic. Let us now discuss them one by one. Coming to the organic pigments. In case of organic pigments, the color obtained is due to the light energy which is absorbed by the delocalized beta electrons of the conjugated system. Electrons do not usually absorb all wavelengths, so some frequencies are allowed to pass through. It is thus unabsorbed light that we see as the color. So, the greater the number of conjugated bonds in the system, the lower will be the energy of light absorbed. When functional groups absorb visible light and appear to be colored, they are called as chromophores. Organic pigments are usually brighter, stronger, more stable, have better gloss development, and some absorb UV light, preventing it from damaging the binder. Now comes the inorganic pigments. Inorganic pigments are heat and light stable, much cheaper than your organic pigments. They are used for specialist pigments, that is anti-corrosion. These are the pigments having improved elasticity and durability. Now comes the solvent. Solvents are required with the purpose of even mixing of paint components. This also makes them easy for application. The solvents of consideration depend on the way the paint has to be applied, because the drying rate of paints depends on the way it has been applied. For example, solvents in spray paints need to evaporate much more quickly than those in brush applied paints. Now, when water or any organic solvent is used, then it forms a medium such that the binder, pigments and additives gets dispersed in molecular form, that is true solutions, or in the form of colloidal particles such as salts or emulsions. When thinners are used as solvent, it is mainly with the intent to modify the viscosity of paint required for applying with roller, brush in the form of tip or spray. Evaporation rate is one of the most important parameters, as the solid outer coating is because of the evaporation as a solvent from the surface. Other characteristic properties comprise the ability of the paint ingredients to dissolve and its toxicity. Additives, they are small amounts of the substances which modifies the properties of paint, for example, dryers, plasticizers and emulsifiers. Paint layers in case of automobiles. Now, the most common types of paint examined in the crime laboratory are finishes. From automobiles, most cars have 4 coats. Some luxury cars have more than one top layer coat. The organic coatings used in case of automobiles comprises of Electrocoat Primer, Primer Surfacer, Basecoat and a clear coat. Let us discuss in brief about them. Coming to the Electrocoat Primer. It is the first layer which applied to the steel surface of an automobile. These primers are epoxy based resins which is electroplated, that is the technique of bathing the steel body in liquefied zinc so as to provide resistance from corrosion. This results in a uniform coating and thickness on the target surface. The color of these primers ranges from black to grey. Now comes the primer surfacer. These are epoxy modified urethanes and polyurethanes, and the main function of the primer surface is to smoothen out the surface while hiding imperfections, as the base coat is the next layer to be applied. This layer is highly pigmented. Color pigments are used to minimize the color contrast between the primer and the top coat. Coming to the base coat, this layer imparts the actual color to the automobile. The integrity of this layer depends on its ability to resist weather, UV radiation and acid rain also. Most commonly, an acrylic based polymer composes the binder system of base coats. The addition of aluminium flakes to automotive paint imparts a metallic look to the paint's finish. Then comes the last coat, that is the clear coat. The clear coat is the last layer in most of the cases, and it is the unpigmented layer that is added to improve the ability, gloss and durability. Most clear coats are acrylic based, but polyurethane clear coats are increasing in popularity. These top coats provide outstanding etch resistance and appearance. By studying the composition and layers of paint, we can actually say that more the number of layers present, more individualistic the sample would be. This also implies that it provides more certainty regarding the identification of the origin or the source of the paint sample. The main point to be noted here is that each manufacturer will have a different method of preparation because of different finishes and other additives, thereby resulting in an individualistic character in every sample of paint. Let us now come to the classification of paints. Paints can be divided into 4 major categories: architectural paints, product coatings, special purpose coatings and art paints. Coming to the architectural paints, these are also sometimes called as household paints and are those coatings which are most often found in residences and businesses. These are used to paint buildings such as houses as well as objects such as mailboxes. They are used for protection as well as to impart color. These are very slow drying paints that usually have linseed oil as the film former. Earlier, the solvents used were often toxic organic compounds, and that is why people could not safely remain inside a house right after it was painted. But nowadays, homes are painted with latex based paints that has water as the solvent. So, house paints are sometimes found as evidence in burglary cases and thefts. Now, coming to the product coatings, these types of paint are usually applied in the process of manufacturing products, such as in case of automobiles. Automotive paint is the paint which is used on automobiles. The automotive paints are important evidence in forensic case work investigation. Why? Because when any vehicular accident takes place, paint chips or smears tend to come off. Although these being the trace evidence does have the potential of linking the victim, suspect and the crime scene. The automobiles are painted with different types of paints having varying layers that helps in their ready individualization. Now comes the special purpose coatings. These types of paint are used for some specific purposes in addition to providing protection and aesthetic improvement, for instance, providing resistance to skid, waterproofing and luminescence. Art paints. These paints are very much similar to the architectural paints, but many artists formulate their own paints, leading to potentially unique source. These are the oldest types of paints. They are designed to last a long time, and most of them are made from naturally occurring oils and pigments. These are occasionally encountered in forgery cases. Let us come to class and individual characteristics of paints now. Paint evidences in the form of smear, chip or dry may be transferred from the surface of one object to another during the perpetration of a crime. Most paint evidence originates from crimes involving hit and run cases. In case of paint evidence, generally two types of characteristics are studied for: the class characteristics and the individual characteristics. Now, class characteristics in case of paint evidence comprises of the color, make and manufacture, the number of layers present, the type of paint and its chemical composition. These characteristics help in defining that the specific sample belongs to a particular class of paint. The individual characteristics are those which are very much unique and individual to that paint chip only. The scrapped off paint chips or loosened off chips due to vehicular accidents comprises of striations present on the edges. These markings are individualistic in nature and will be unique for a paint chip only. No two paint chips can have the same markings even if they are of the same make and manufacture. Let us now come to the importance of paint in various cases. Our environment contains millions of objects whose surfaces are painted. Thus, paint in one form or another is one of the most prevalent types of physical evidence received by the crime laboratory. Paint as physical evidence is perhaps most frequently encountered in hit and run and burglary cases. For example, a chip of dried paint or a paint smear may be transferred to the clothing of a hit and run victim on impact with an automobile, or paint smears could be transferred onto a tool during a burglary. Evidently, on most occasions, paint transference from one surface to other could impact the object with a unique characteristic which is actually helpful from the forensic point of view. Now, during the process of comparison, paint layers found beneath a surface offers valuable points for this study. Furthermore, forensic analysis can detect subtle differences in paint binder formulations as well as major or minor differences in the elemental composition of paint. Obviously, these properties cannot be discerned by the naked eye. On many instances, the criminalist should compare two or more paints so as to establish their source of origin, whether it is common or not. For example, a comparison of this type can associate a person or an automobile with the scene of crime. Nevertheless, the criminalist should confine his investigation to comparisons only. Crime laboratories are often asked to identify the make and model of a car from a very small amount of paint left behind at a crime scene. They often help in identifying the color, make and model of an automobile by examining small quantities of paint recovered at an accident scene. Such requests are normally made in hit and run cases and can lead to the apprehension of the responsible vehicle. But it has to be noted that such information is frequently of use in a search for an unknown car involved in a hit and run incident. Often, the questioned paint can be identified when its color is compared to the color chips representing the various makes and models of manufactured cars. However, in many cases, it is not possible to state the exact make or model of the car in question, because any one paint color can be found on more than one car model. Now, coming to the collection, packaging and handling of paint at the scene of crime. Now, paint evidence is found in the majority of hit and run cases, and it may provide a link between a victim and the responsible vehicle. Paint evidence may also be present in various other types of crimes, including burglary and homicide cases. In case of hit and run accidents, paint chips are usually found. Smears may also be present in few cases. Many a times, fabric impressions also get imprinted upon wet paint and leaves a characteristic mark. In case of burglary, paint chips can be procured from tools used on that specific painted surface, or fingerprints may sometimes be also found in wet paint. Similarly, shoe and tire impressions are frequently found when they come in contact with the wet paint. Paint evidence comes in two types: paint chips, that is the flakes, and paint smears. Let us discuss them one by one. Coming to the paint chips first. During a crash, paint chips may fall from the car and be transferred to a person, another object, or even another car. Because the layer structure is intact, paint chips provide the most valuable information from its analysis. There are a number of methods for removing paint chips from a car surface. If the chips are loose, they can be pried off. If not, a sharp scalpel or knife must be used to cut the chips out. The knife must cut the chips way down to the surface on which the paint was applied to make sure that all the layers have been collected. Coming to paint smears. Paint smears are more difficult to handle. They usually consist of just the top layer of paint. When the top layer is a clear coat, it may be difficult to see the transferred paint. Smears are often transferred when an automobile side swipes another object. When the other object is a car, it is even more difficult to interpret a smear since it may be mixed in with other layers of paint of that car. Now coming to the collection of paint samples should be carried out with caution because it is possible that a physical match may exist between the known and questioned paint samples. Samples from the crime scene should include all loose or transferred paint materials. Nearly any object or surface may retain a paint transfer, and things as varied as tools, architectural structures and elements, glass fragments, fabrics, hairs, vehicles. Evidentiary items with paint transfers should be packaged and submitted to the lab. It is also important to remember that cross transference of the paint samples could have occurred. Keeping this in mind, known and questioned samples should be collected from both surfaces. Paint evidence should be first photographed and then removed manually with non-metallic tools such as small wooden sticks, toothpicks or plastic forceps. If tape lifts are to be used, then the paint evidence should be collected first because of their structure, fragility and size. In case of tape lifting of the samples, it becomes nearly difficult to manipulate the paint samples as they are on the sticky side of the adhesive tape. But the main disadvantage of this technique is that the adhesives present on the sticky side can contaminate the paint sample and apparently change its chemistry. So, proper collection of known samples of paint from an automobile is critical to successful analysis. Like most forensic evidence, paint analysis is the most valuable when the unknown can be compared with the known. It is important to collect all the layers of paint in the known sample. The known sample should not be collected from the damaged area of the car. It is likely that foreign materials from the object which the car hit or the car have been transferred into the paint. Paint from the other object may have become intermixed with the paint that is native to the car. The best practice is to gather known samples from undamaged areas as near as possible to the damaged area. Taking paint far away from the damaged area can be misleading. Parts of cars may have been repainted or even replaced, and the characteristics of the paint in those parts may be very different from those in the damaged area. Paint smears should not be removed from the surface of the object at the scene. The entire object or car parts should be sent to the laboratory where the smear can be removed. Paint chips should never be taped to card or other objects. The paint chip may be difficult to remove from the tape, and the tape adhesive can contaminate the paint chip and perhaps render chemical testing ineffective. Packaging and handling. Place samples into separate, appropriately sized containers. For example, do not put very small items into very large envelopes that help to prevent breakage or loss. Containers may be vials, metals or cardboard pillboxes or paper bundles placed into envelopes. Plastic should not be used for the packaging of small loose trace evidence due to static electricity. Do not pack with cotton or other protective material directly touching the object. All edges, corners of envelopes should be sealed to prevent sample loss. Do not package wet evidence. Clothing or objects containing paint evidence should be air dried prior to packaging. Items may be wrapped in paper and then placed into an appropriate container. Do not wrap items on a tabletop without thoroughly cleaning that surface. Avoid cross-contamination between evidence and reference samples. Each and every properly packed evidence should be marked accordingly. Now, let us come to the conclusion. Paint is highly valuable evidence due to the availability of painted surfaces in wide range and variety of layered colors, luster and types. Paint as physical evidence is perhaps most frequently encountered in hit and run and burglary cases. For example, a chip of dried paint or a paint spear may be transferred to the clothing of a hit and run victim on impact with an automobile, or paint spears could be transferred into a tool during a burglary. So, paint as trace evidence has much evidentiary importance and hence should be overlooked for in a scene of crime. With all these information here, we come to the end of today's lecture. Do keep in mind what we have discussed today. I will be back with one more lecture in this series. If you want to learn more and enhance your knowledge, you may log on to our website www.cec.nic.in for MCQs, quizzes, LORs, etc. Thank you for your time today. I will see you in the next lecture. Have a great day.